There is so much more along the paths I have walked than the names that echo in sermons and songs. The world knows the 12, the pillars of my message, but there are lesser-known stories, lives that went unnoticed yet played crucial roles in what you now know as faith. This is the account of transformed hearts, silences that spoke louder than words, and hidden sacrifices that upheld my mission. Prepare to hear about those who walked with me, not in the sight of all, but whose marks remain, invisible yet immortal. Walking along the shores of the Sea of Galilee, I felt the wind caressing my face. Around me, the waters reflected the sky, and birds flew overhead in search of food. It was a peaceful scene, but my heart was always in motion. Every step I took, every soul I encountered, brought new reflections on what was being built and on those who walked with me. It is easy to remember the 12, their names echoing through the centuries. But rarely do people wonder about the others. The many who don't appear in the formal lists, but who were just as transformed and transformative. Throughout my journey, I met followers whose stories were hidden in the shadows of time, but who sustained the flame that now illuminates the world. I remember one morning, sitting on a hillside, watching those who followed me. Fishermen with calloused hands, women who had faced rejection and challenges, the rich and the poor, a mosaic of lives that came together in my message. Each of them carried something special, a lesson that transcended time. Not everyone was at the forefront like Peter or John. Some preferred anonymity, like Joseph of Arimathea, whose silent hand served me when no one else dared. Others, like Mary Magdalene, faced public scorn but shone with an incomparable courage. Who among you will be remembered? I wondered as I looked at them. The answer wasn't in the greatness of visible actions, but in the love that moved them. To me, the kingdom of God was always more about willing hearts than about titles or positions. This thought stayed with me as I walked, healed, and taught. The 12 had their stories, but today I will tell you about those the world has forgotten, but whom heaven will always remember. The first time I saw Mary Magdalene was in Magdala, a busy village by the lake. The narrow streets were full of merchants offering fresh fish, herbs, and fabrics, but it was her presence that captured my attention. She didn't stand out by her appearance or posture, but there was something in her eyes, a mix of pain and a longing for something deeper. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Sinner, unworthy, some would say, while others simply looked away. She carried the labels imposed on her like chains, but I saw beyond that. I saw her struggle, an internal battle that few could understand. When she finally came to me, her hesitant steps contrasted with the determination on her face. She fell to her knees before me, wordless, but with tears that spoke louder than any speech. Her eyes met mine, and there I saw a soul that longed to be free. Mary, I said, calling her by name, as if it were the first time she had ever heard it without contempt. Your faith has saved you. In that moment, something changed. It wasn't just a healing or a liberation. It was a rebirth. She no longer had to carry the weight of her past. And so, Mary Magdalene began to walk with me, not as a shadow, but as a light. Over the days, I watched as she faced the murmurs of the other disciples. Not everyone was ready to accept a woman with her past in our group. But Mary, with her quiet strength, proved time and again that her faith was genuine. One of the scenes that struck me most was when we were sitting around a campfire, and Mary began to share her story. She spoke about the pains of her youth, the wrong choices she had made, and how, in a moment of despair, she had found in me a hope she never imagined. I was like someone walking in endless darkness, she said, her voice trembling. But in that moment when you looked at me, I felt something I had never felt before. It wasn't judgment, but love. A love that showed me I could still be someone in the eyes of God. The other disciples listened in silence, some visibly moved, while others still struggled to reconcile her presence in the group. But, over time, Mary not only earned their respect, she inspired them. She became a force of leadership, especially among the other women who followed us. Her courage was a constant reminder that the kingdom of God was not just for the powerful or the morally impeccable, but for those willing to surrender completely. As we walked together, Mary taught me something new every day. She showed me that the labels imposed by the world do not define who we are in the eyes of God, and that even the most rejected can become the most faithful. Mary was just one of many voices who, despite being discredited by the world, carried my message. Yet others, like Joseph of Arimathea and Joanna, demonstrated their faith in less visible, but equally transformative, acts. Now, I invite you to hear their stories. Not all who followed me were willing or able to do so openly. Among them was Joseph of Arimathea, a man whose faith grew in the shadow of his position. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, a respected and powerful council, but also a place full of intrigue and resistance against me. I met Joseph during a dinner where he was present, at the home of another religious leader. He didn't speak much on that occasion, but I felt his gaze fixed on me, trying to understand more than just the words I was saying. His silence was not disinterest. It was a reflection of someone carrying an internal conflict. Later, he came to me, in secret, just as Nicodemus would do later. On a moonless night, he found me in a simple house, far from the bustling streets of Jerusalem. When he entered, there was restlessness in his eyes. "Rabbi," he began, hesitating before continuing, "I believe what you say. Your words carry a truth that the council cannot understand. But how can I follow you without losing everything I've built?" He was not just speaking of wealth or status, but of a whole life dedicated to maintaining his position, reputation, and security. There was in Joseph a flame of faith that fought against the winds of fear and doubt. I listened attentively, knowing that his journey would be different from that of other disciples. "Joseph," I said, "it is not the visibility of your actions that matters, but the love with which you carry them out. Not everyone is called to walk by my side visibly. Some serve in silence, but their works are as significant as those the world sees." From that moment, Joseph began to support me in ways few understood. He didn't just provide resources, but also created connections that opened doors for my work in places where there was resistance. He did this in secret, often without the other disciples even knowing. After my crucifixion, Joseph took the step that would seal his faith publicly. While many feared being associated with me, he dared to ask Pilate for my body, risking his position in the Sanhedrin. More than that, he offered his own tomb, a place meant for him and his family, so I could be buried. At that moment, Joseph showed that his faith had overcome his fear. It was not words or sermons that defined his journey, but acts of love and sacrifice. He is a reminder that, even when our actions are not seen by all, they have an eternal impact when carried out with a sincere heart. Joanna was another follower whose presence, though discreet, was crucial to my mission. She was the wife of Chuza, a steward in the court of Herod Antipas, the man who ordered the death of John the Baptist. Her social standing was high, but her heart was with me. I met Joanna in Capernaum, where she had come to find me with an urgent request. Chuza was away, and she seized the opportunity to leave home. When she reached me, her face showed a mixture of fatigue and determination. "Rabbi," she began, with a soft yet firm voice, "I've heard of you. My body is healed, but it is my soul that seeks redemption." I had healed her from an illness that had debilitated her for years, but more than that, I realized she desired something greater: purpose. After that encounter, Joanna began to support me discreetly. She used the resources she had to sustain my ministry, often risking her safety and reputation. Once, she approached me with a bundle carefully hidden under her cloak. Inside were silver and gold coins. "Rabbi," she said, looking around to make sure no one was listening, "this is all I could gather without Chuza noticing. I want you to use it to help the poor and support your followers." I accepted it, but not for the coins. I accepted it for the faith that pulsed through her gesture. Joanna understood something few in her position did. Her wealth was not an end in itself, but a means to serve something greater. Not all the disciples viewed her presence favorably. Some murmured about how privileged she was, living in comfort while many of them abandoned everything to follow me. But Joanna never allowed these criticisms to distance her from her mission. She was especially close to Mary Magdalene. The two formed a bond that transcended class barriers and personal histories. Joanna admired Mary's strength, and Mary saw in Joanna a quiet courage that many underestimated. When I resurrected, Joanna was one of the first to witness the empty tomb, alongside Mary Magdalene. Her cry of joy echoed in that silent place, a testimony that her faith was not in vain. Joanna is a reminder that, regardless of our position or resources, everyone has something to offer to the kingdom of God. She used what she had not to exalt herself, but to serve, proving that true wealth lies in a heart willing to give. Joseph and Joanna represent complementary sides of a faith that is discreet yet essential. However, others, like Nicodemus and Simon, faced unique challenges on their journeys. Internal and external conflicts that led them to grow spiritually in unexpected ways. The night was calm when Nicodemus came to me for the first time. The darkness seemed to reflect the conflict he carried in his heart. A man of great knowledge and position, Nicodemus was a Pharisee and a member of the Sanhedrin, someone respected among the religious leaders of Jerusalem. Yet, he was uneasy, drawn to a truth that his traditions could not explain. "Rabbi," he began, adjusting his cloak, perhaps more to hide his face than to ward off the cold. "We know you are from God, for no one can perform the signs you do unless God is with him." There was sincerity in his words, but also hesitation. Nicodemus was a divided man. He recognized the truth, but feared what it would mean for his position. I listened patiently. Then, in a serene tone, I said, "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." His expression changed to perplexity. "How can someone be born when they are old? Surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb to be born." Nicodemus was stuck in logic, in literalism. He sought to understand the spiritual with a mind trained to dissect laws and traditions. I explained that the birth I spoke of was spiritual, a rebirth that transcends the body. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but the spirit gives birth to spirit. He fell silent for a moment, absorbing my words. How can this be? His eyes were full of doubt, but I also saw a desire to understand. Nicodemus was on the brink of something greater, but fear still held him back. He visited me other times, always at night, always hidden. Each encounter was a small battle between his reason and his faith. Months later, during a meeting of the Sanhedrin, he finally took a courageous step. When the other leaders spoke of condemning me, Nicodemus interrupted them. "Does our law condemn anyone without first hearing them and knowing what they have done?" The room fell silent. The next murmur was one of mockery. "Are you also from Galilee?" they said, ridiculing him. But in that moment, Nicodemus had shown that his faith was beginning to overcome his fear. After my crucifixion, Nicodemus took the final step. He joined Joseph of Arimathea to care for my body, bringing myrrh and aloes in abundance. For someone so cautious, that was an act of faith and courage that echoed through time. Nicodemus taught me that doubts are not the end of faith, but the beginning of its journey. He showed that even those who start hesitantly can become pillars of the kingdom of God. Among the 12 apostles, Simon the Zealot was a man whom many underestimated. Before following me, he was part of a radical group known for its opposition to the Romans. The Zealots were men of action, determined to liberate Israel by force. Simon brought this intensity to my company, but his transformation was one of the deepest. When I first met him, Simon carried the passion of a warrior. He believed that the Messiah would be a military leader, someone who would defeat the Romans and restore the throne of David. His initial disappointment with me was palpable, but he did not turn away. "Rabbi," he once said, as we walked the hills of Galilee, "how can you speak of love and forgiveness while our enemies oppress us? Isn't the Messiah supposed to bring justice by the sword?" I stopped and looked at him. "Simon," I said calmly, "true strength is not in the sword, but in the heart that chooses to love. My kingdom will not be built with blood, but with sacrifice." He fell silent, but I knew my words challenged him deeply. Simon was not a man of speeches. He was a man of action. And little by little, he began to understand that his passion could be channeled into something greater than earthly rebellions. There was a defining moment that showed his transformation. In a Samaritan village, we were rejected and insulted. Simon, furious, turned to me. "Rabbi, allow me to call down fire from heaven to consume these men." I held his shoulder. "Simon, you do not know what spirit you are of. I did not come to destroy lives, but to save them." He lowered his head, ashamed, but that was a turning point for him. Over time, Simon learned that his strength was not in his ability to fight, but in his willingness to serve. After my resurrection, Simon was one of those who took my message to the world. He used his passion to spread the gospel, becoming a living testimony that even the most combative hearts can be transformed by love. Simon the Zealot is a reminder that the kingdom of God does not exclude the strong, but redirects them to a greater strength, the strength of spiritual transformation. While Nicodemus faced the doubts of reason and Simon discovered the power of transformation, others served in even quieter ways. Their stories, though less known, formed the invisible foundation upon which the kingdom was built. Let's meet these silent disciples in the next chapter. While the more well-known names of my followers echo through the centuries, the voices that remained silent upheld my mission in ways many overlook. They did not seek recognition, but their actions and sacrifices were essential to the growth of the kingdom. I think of Simon of Cyrene. He was not a follower when our paths crossed, but at that crucial moment, he became part of my journey. As I carried the cross through the streets of Jerusalem, my strength failed. The soldiers pointed to him, a common man who was just passing by. "You help him carry the cross," they ordered. Simon hesitated, confused and reluctant. But when our eyes met, he realized that this was not just an imposed obligation. It was a calling. He took the bloody wood, sharing with me the weight of suffering, without fully understanding the significance of that moment. After that, Simon did not disappear. His experience transformed him, leading him to join the first followers after my resurrection. He and his family, especially his children, became living witnesses of the redeeming power of sacrifice. I also think of the woman who anointed my feet with oil in Bethany. Her action was seen as a waste by some, but to me, it was a demonstration of unmatched faith and love. That night, while we were gathered at the house of Simon the leper, she entered quietly, holding an alabaster jar. Everyone watched her with curiosity and, in some cases, disdain. Without saying a word, she broke the jar and poured the fragrant oil on my feet. Judas, irritated, exclaimed, "Why this waste? This perfume could have been sold for a large sum and the money given to the poor." I looked at him, then at her, and said, "Leave her alone. She has done a beautiful thing for me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. She has anointed my body for burial." She understood something that many still did not understand, that my path was about to culminate in sacrifice. Her simple yet profound gesture showed a faith that transcended words. These stories, of people like Simon of Cyrene and the woman with the alabaster jar, are reminders that the kingdom of God is not sustained only by those who speak or lead, but by those who serve in silence. They are the invisible hands that lifted the message to reach the world. When I think of all those who followed me, the 12, the women, the rich, the poor, the sinners, the leaders, I see how each one played a unique role in building the kingdom. They had no idea of the impact their actions would have in the centuries to come. Mary Magdalene was the first to witness my resurrection. She carried the news to the others, becoming the announcer of new life. Joanna used her position and wealth to sustain the needy, showing that even those who live in luxury can be humble servants of God. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, with their acts of courage, proved that even the powerful can find true strength in faith. Simon the Zealot and Simon of Cyrene showed that transformation and service can come in unexpected ways. These intertwined lives formed the foundation of the movement you now know as Christianity. But it wasn't just their actions that mattered, it was their willing hearts. They taught me that the kingdom is not built with armies, but with sacrifice and love. And what about you? You are also called to be part of this story. Perhaps you don't see yourselves as leaders or public figures, but every act of kindness, every silent sacrifice, every word of encouragement, all of it has an impact that goes beyond what you can imagine. The forgotten disciples taught me that it is not recognition that matters, but obedience to the call. They trusted that their small actions, done with faith, would be used for something much greater. And so it was. My message to you is simple. Do not underestimate the value of what you do. You are part of something eternal. If Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Simon, and so many others without power or position could transform the world, what will you do with what you have in your hands? The kingdom still needs invisible hands. The story is far from over, and you are called to continue writing the next pages. Now that you've heard these stories, I want you to reflect. Who are you in the kingdom of God? Perhaps you are not like Peter or John, whose voices echoed through the generations. Perhaps you are like Joseph of Arimathea, supporting in silence, or like the woman with the alabaster jar, whose faith is expressed in simple yet profound gestures. Remember that the kingdom is not made only of great deeds. It is built by daily acts of love and sacrifice, often invisible to the eyes of the world, but precious in the eyes of God. I leave you with this question. How can you use your lives to leave an eternal impact?